Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Covey Wellness Center podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Joy Covey, and I'm super excited to be with you here in season 3, talking about authors as often as possible, local authors and people that are connected here as friends of the center. And today we have Dan Barber with us, who is no exception. He is a Coldwater resident, which is not too far from the little town of Elmville. I think I've got that right, Dan. And we're excited to have him here to talk about his book, Vantage Point, 5 Perspectives to Live a Better Story. And so certainly the title alone speaks to a lot of the work that we do here with people around mindset, around healthy thinking, perspective building, goal setting. There's a lot of places that we could intersect here. But before we go into a deep dive with the book, I'm just going to ask Dan to tell us a little bit about himself so that our listeners can kind of get to know you a little bit better and place you sort of in the context for this conversation.
Well, good morning, Sarah. Thank you so much. I've been looking forward to this conversation ever since we first touched base. So thank you for this opportunity. And I'm looking forward to our conversation this morning. A little bit about me. I'm 58 years old. I'm married to a great wife, Kathy, 34 years, almost 35.
Congrats.
I'm a grandpa, and I have 3 grandchildren. My third grandchild was born about 6 weeks ago.
Oh, wow.
And so I just love being a grandpa. I'm an entrepreneur. We own a chocolate factory. My family owns a chocolate factory in Craighurst, which is close to you as well.
Yes, and, that's right.
So Kathy and our daughter Megan are kind of running the show, although Megan's on mat leave right now.
Yes.
So it's that's quite an adventure over there. I don't make chocolate, but I do test it once in a while.
I guess you would have to.
Yes. So I do some of the back end stuff for the shop, so the girls don't have to worry about paying the bills and taxes and payroll and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
Cass and I we own M's Cafe in Coldwater. We opened that up in 2015. So that's kind of when we launched into this entrepreneurial season for us. And we had no idea what we were doing. But we grew that business and then we sold it a couple of years ago. And it's still thriving and we're thrilled about that. That's here in Coldwater where I live. So I still walk down there 3 or 4 times a week and grab a coffee and talk to all the customers I know and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that small town feel, right?
Absolutely.
Like the Luke's Diner of Gilmore Girls kind of thing.
It's Mayberry, right? And I'm an introvert and I can't get to the cafe without talking to 10 people, so it's fun. It's good. And we love the small town experience for sure.
Yeah.
But most of my time I've been writing, and now I'm a life coach. So most of my clients are probably in their, kind of 2 demographics actually, like the 40, 50 person who's just looking for some changes and not really sure how to make that happen.
Yeah.
They may have some options, but they might feel stuck a little bit and, not exactly sure where they want to go, but they know they want to go somewhere. That's kind of who my book was written for. That was kind of my avatar, I guess, as I was writing the book. But then I have some wonderful conversations with the 20-something demographic who are just starting out in life, more or less, but asking some important questions and which you don't often ask when you're 24 or 20. You don't really think about your 40. That's like a lifetime away.
Yes.
But so it's been great to talk to some college students or young adults who are working and just starting out life and trying to figure out some of these things on the front end of life. So that's been a lot of fun as well.
I've heard it described before that we live life in sort of 3 phases, and that first phase encompasses the 20-somethings, and then there's sort of the midlife phase, and then there's sort of the end of life phase, and it's sort of the 1 to 30, 31 to 70, I guess, 60, then the last phase of life. I don't know if the division points are exactly such, but there's these phases. And so it is different questions that people are asking in different phases. And that midlife point, we see a lot of people here at the center who are coming and just have that, what I like to affectionately call the midlife opportunity instead of the
Absolutely.
midlife crisis, right? Where
I'm
it's
with
like,
you there.
I'm coming to a point where some of the things I've been doing, some of the ways I've been relating to people, some of my career stuff, we're hitting points where that doesn't seem to be working for me. And I only really planned to this point. Like I only had
Right.
goals to this point, and now I don't, what comes next for me. And so there's lots of great career conversations and creative conversations and just faith conversations with people at different, stages. But we definitely see a lot of that in therapy too. I don't know if it's true that that's the most common time that people reach out, is at sort of that midlife kind of point, but it's certainly anecdotally, that's when we see a lot of people realizing, okay, I've hit some walls and I've done what I can with the tools that I have in the relationship I have, in the workplace I have, in my own emotional management, whatever it is, or they start to hit some most significant life challenges. And so it's pretty common. That demographic is a really common demographic to need that kind of support. So I love that. So, and 20 somethings, I'm all about, my kids are 21 to 13. And so I'm just loving that emerging into young adulthood. And I was a teacher before. I don't know if you knew that. I taught in the high school system for 15 years and love teenagers. So I have a heart for that group. So I think we're aligned in lots of things, including small town life and not being able to go to the coffee shop without talking to 10 people. Although I'm an extrovert, so I'm okay with that part of it.
There you go. I'm okay with it too. It's just more work for me.
That's true. It just, you have to sit down after. And
That's
I'm
right.
like, where are the rest of the people?
I need a nap.
For sure.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, I love that. So today we really want to talk about your resource and maybe where that intersects a bit with our audience. And so let's just start by you telling us about sort of the origin story for Vantage Point. What led you to write about this topic? What brought you to this topic and to the book specifically?
Right. Well, the idea for the book actually started about over 20 years ago. So I don't know what that says when it only came out like a year ago. So, but
it was percolating.
Yes, for a very long time. That's for sure. If you remember the Bourne series, the movie series, the Bourne Identity, the Bourne Supremacy, the original trilogy was I just loved that series, right? And so when that 2002 is when the Bourne Identity came out. And so I saw it, I loved it, I saw it again, and all of a sudden there were some themes in the movie that resonated with me. And this will say a bit about my personality. So I have a journal that's just full of notes from watching the movie. So
I love that.
And I started that back in 22 years ago. And Jason Bourne is asking important questions. Like the movie's great. I mean, the scenes, the action, the black ops, the car chases,
it's everything you want in that type of movie,
right? And it's relatively clean movie, like and it's just good. Like it's just a great storyline. But underneath that, Jason Bourne, Matt Damon is asking some really important questions. He obviously, the storyline is he doesn't remember who he is. As he begins to learn who he is, he doesn't like who he is. And he wants to become someone different, but there's a lot of forces out there that don't want him to change. So that's his struggle, right? Trying to identify who is he really, and who does he want to be? And I go, man, I'm not sure there's a more important question, to be honest, at a certain level, right? So
that's like a human theme. That's why it's so resonant, perhaps, with a lot of people, right?
Right. And so that's what got me thinking and got me writing and just making notes. And then the idea for the book actually came from the sequel, The Supremacy. Yeah. If anyone knows, I'm going to sound like a Bourne fanatic a little bit because I could probably quote the whole movie to you. I've watched it too many times, according to my wife. But there's a scene where Jason Bourne is tracking the CIA to Berlin, and he knows where they are. They're setting up in his office tower, and so he's on the other rooftop looking through a scope on a rifle, and he calls Pamela Landy, if anyone remembers that character, and he wants to come in, right? And so he's he wants Nikki, who he knows from Paris, to meet him and bring him in, and of course Pamela has no idea he's looking at her. There's that great scene, and she goes, "Well, what if I can't find her?" And he says, "Well, it's easy. She's standing right next to you." Right? So
Yes.
fantastic. But see, he had the advantage at that point. Like he's in total control of the situation because he had the vantage point.
Yes,
right? So
that's right.
That's actually where the title came from, just from that scene.
I love that scene. I know the exact one you mean.
It's the first time you see it, it kind of gives you goosebumps, right? So
yeah. Sorry for those who we might have spoiled.
Yeah, the spoiler alert, but it is 22 years old, or 20 years old now. So
we're allowed to talk about it now.
That's right. You probably should have seen it by now.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's kind of where the title and the ideas of the book came from. And to be honest, it just kind of, like you said, percolated with me for a long time. I actually wrote another book previously, a parenting book.
Okay.
And I joked that was a way of delaying writing this one.
Right. Yeah.
Because this was a much harder project than the parenting book was was a project, and I loved doing it. And both my kids wrote a chapter in it as well.
I love that.
And we got married with the agreement that we wouldn't have children. I didn't want kids at all.
Okay.
And so I didn't plan for kids, didn't want them. God had different plans for us, and Megan came along 6 years into our marriage, and then Alex a couple years later. So, which they're just the greatest blessing in my life, as you probably can attest to. And now being a grandfather is like, if my selfish ambitions back then actually came to fruition, I wouldn't be experiencing what I'm experiencing now. Like the joy of being a grandfather is just, it's hard to describe it. So anyway.
So interesting parenting journey that you had, and reconciling that change. And so that was the first book, but you were kind of just still percolating all along the while on this Vantage Point.
That book just kept pushing off Vantage Point, but eventually it was the right season, right? So about 2 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, it took me about a year and a half to write. But I knew it was time to finally get it on paper, at least write it, get it out, get the manuscript written. If it ever goes public, we'll see. But
but
I just had to get it out of my head, right? I just had to do it. So, and I was grateful for writing is hard, and it's rewarding, and it's all that. It's like, well, any other work. Like work is rewarding, and sometimes you hate it.
That's fair.
Most authors, it's a roller coaster ride. You hate it one day, you think no one's ever going to read it or get anything out of it, and then the next day you're inspired to keep going. So so I did that for about a year and a half, and finally, I guess it was September last fall when it came out. So there you go. That's kind of the backstory to the book. And it really was, as I said earlier, written for a typical client of mine. So that's kind of who I had in mind when I was writing it. Like someone who's feeling a little bit restless, stuck, which is
needing change,
not sure what that change looks like. Right.
But also wondering about their own identity and trying to get to know themselves and see themselves moving into the future. Yeah. Those are so many, again, universal maybe themes that, people are wrestling with at different points. And it sounds it sounds very empowering. Like the way you've set it up with the Jason Bourne story and that scene, even it's like, how can you empower yourself to have the vantage point you need, to have the perspectives that you need, to have the mindset and the directional, orientation to life that you need to keep moving forward, and how powerful that is. If you are Jason Bourne in that situation, you can see, you have the vantage point to see what's before you. I mean, obviously we can't fully see the future, but to understand how we want to orient to that and where we want to position ourselves to move forward. So I wonder if you could talk a bit about, you have the coaching clients, again, similar type of clients that we might see here in therapy as well. But I wonder if you could just sort of speak to, like, where does this book fit with sort of the wellness journeys of your readers, of our listeners? Like, where do you see that intersection?
I mean, that's such a great question, because there's so many directions we could go with that alone, right? We could talk all day about that question, because, what is wellness and what is meaning and purpose, right?
Yeah.
So to me, those things are very much connected. Almost, I would say, to the degree that you're living with meaning and purpose, is your wellness is kind of determined by that. Or it's a chicken and egg thing, I suppose. You could argue that point, but
yeah, but there's a link. There's no question that there's
absolutely.
a link, between your sense of purposefulness and meaning in life and your ability to live well.
Right.
Yeah.
In fact, I would suggest, in my experience, with some of my clients, some unhealth, some anxiety, frustration, stress, like just kind of this emotional unsettledness,
Sure.
for lack of a better term.
That's a good term, I think.
Is sometimes connected to not living out who you truly are. Right. So, I mean, like you're saying, like when we get to our midlife opportunities, and I love that phrase. I don't use midlife crisis as a term at all.
Yeah.
But some do. I mean, crisis is real for people, for sure.
Sure.
But sometimes by the time you're in your 40s or 50s, you've lived a number of years not really thinking about these things, and you kind of get into routines and patterns that maybe cause some drift from who you really are, and you stop even asking those kinds of questions. But I think when you get to a certain age, maybe you have some space to ask these questions.
Yeah.
So when you're 35 and you have 3 kids at home and you've got a mortgage and you're just running hard all the time, like you don't even have the emotional or physical energy to like ask the question, seems like exhausting, right?
Yeah.
So, and it is anyway. Like it's not an easy question to ask or answer, in theory. So
yeah, it's the deep work of those reflections, right? And it's like, well, I don't know if I can go there. I don't know if I can get into that. And I think sometimes life will stop us and force us to ask the questions, whether that's through illness or upheaval or job loss or pandemic or something, right?
Yeah.
Something happens to disrupt the way we've been doing life, and we're maybe forced to ask different questions and to consider things. But I think you're right. Like a lot of us are in autopilot a lot of our lives, just kind of going through the things we think we're supposed to be doing, showing up at work, feeding our kids, cutting the grass, like whatever the things are. And there's not as much, unless we're intentional about that, there's not a lot of space where people are actually reflecting and thinking about their lives in meaningful ways, and yet I think that's so important. Like, I don't think we know the importance of that skill often earlier in life, and then we realize the importance of it later. And I think the word we use for that, like lack of alignment, or at least that I use when I'm talking with clients, is there's an incongruence. Like things are not lining up internally for you. And so you have this tension, and sometimes I'll use this analogy for those who are obviously listening to the audio. If you put your hands palm to palm and you imagine that there's an elastic around your 8 fingers around the top. And if you were to pull those 2 hands apart, you can imagine there's tension. And so if you think about your right hand as your reality and your left hand as your expectations for your reality, the further those 2 things are apart, the more tension there is in that elastic. And so you want to close those gaps to restore that sense of congruence or alignment internally. And a lot of people, whenever this happens to them, but it is commonly happening in midlife, they have expectations for what they would be like, what their life would be like, and they have a reality that's different from that. And, you were sharing earlier about not thinking you were going to have kids, and then you were going to have kids. Well, that's going to put some tension in your elastic band, right? And now you got to figure out, how do I want to close those gaps? And do I want to adjust my expectations? Do I want to change my behavior? Is it some combination of the 2 to restore that sense of, integration in the person? And then move forward from that place. So I think that's a pretty common, like, I just feel like things are off with me. They're not aligned, and I want to put them back together or back into a right lane, or with a sense of, purpose and meaning and direction for whatever it is in front of them. So I definitely think people can identify with that. Can you tell us a little bit more about the 5 perspectives that you landed on? I mean, there's
Mm-hmm.
probably 100 perspectives that would be helpful for people,
Yeah.
but what are
Yeah.
the five and maybe
picked
why?
five. I
Yeah.
picked five because I probably couldn't think of any more. That was it. But, that was it for me. But I picked five, and they're looking back, looking around, looking within or inside, looking above, and then looking ahead. So those are
Okay.
all directional in a sense.
Yeah.
Um, but if you think of it like many of us in the workplace have done like 360 evaluations, and that's kind of what this is. It's an evaluation tool of ourselves.
Mm.
And so each perspective forces us to kind of go in a certain direction and look in that direction to get some clues. There are clues in each one of these perspectives. And
Right.
as we gather these clues, as we take all these perspectives together, we can get a clearer picture of who we are, why we're here, what we want to do, and where we want to
Yeah.
go. So that's about as I
Yeah.
don't know. That's kind of where they come from, and that's kind of where I guide the reader. And in theory, you could jump into any. There's only five. The five sections is how the book is broken down. You could start anywhere.
Yeah.
If you're a nostalgic pining for the old days, then you probably like looking back. Some people don't. That scares people to look back,
Yeah.
right?
It might be really hard to look back.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there might be reasons why you don't want to go back. Looking around, those are like, what are the opportunities? Like, if you're entrepreneurial, that's probably you. Like, you're always looking for something.
Yeah.
Looking inside, if you're an introspective kind of person, then you're gonna be okay with doing that. And looking above is really, that's the one perspective where, so I write the book, not assuming the reader has I'm a Christian, so that's my worldview. And it does come through in the book, but I don't assume the reader has that worldview.
Yeah.
But in the looking above perspective, that's the one section where I say, could you just hang with me for a while and just consider these questions?
Yeah. The supernatural, spiritual
what if,
realm.
like the what if questions? What if God does exist? And what
Yeah.
if God created you?
Right.
And what if God created you on purpose? And what if God created you with specific things to do?
Yeah.
That's very compelling to me. Like that's what gets me up in the morning. I love that. Right. So,
Yeah.
and again,
Well, it certainly lends purpose to our days too, right? And
right.
often that spiritual realm. And so, from our perspective, we often look at holistic health, right? And so we're looking at physical, emotional, spiritual, financial, relational, like it's all the L's, and you could go on and on. And so there's a few things that are coming to mind for me when you're saying that. And one thing is in psychology and working with clients in psychotherapy, we're often talking about setting up behavioral experiments, right? Where we're deciding to do something, to take on an exercise, to be curious about it. And as experimenters, as scientists, if you will, to collect the data around that. So let's say, for example, your experiment is, what if you got up half an hour early and walked for half an hour every morning for 3 weeks? What do you notice? What changes? What works? What didn't work? Where was it hard? Where wasn't it hard? And you start having these curiosity orientations, like a investigator of your own life, to try and understand how that experiment is shifting things. And, that's a simple example, but you could see how that could play out with any number of things that you could implement. But the goal is to not assume that this is necessarily going to work, but to say, I'm willing to try it. I'm willing to orient towards this for this time and collect the data on it. And then I can decide, is it working for me? Isn't it working for me? What did I notice? Which direction it put me in? All that kind of stuff. So we're constantly having people like, well, let's try this and see how it goes and tweak. And, and so for me, when you talk about the reflection piece, of looking back, looking around, looking within, looking above, looking ahead. I think I got those right. Yeah. And to me, that's sort of there's a the reflection exercise itself is an opportunity to collect some data, to consider, to have conversations, maybe even with people who can inform those parts of your life, and to start to seek to get that information that you need to then base some theming on, some decisions, some identity work on. And so then it's sort of that concept of like turning the gem. I don't know if you've heard of this expression before, but it's the idea of like you have a big gemstone and the light, if you hold it a certain way, the light will hit it a certain way. If you turn it a slightly different way, it's going to hit a different way. And again, and again, there's all these facets. And as you turn it around at little by little and look at things from different angles, you start to get the fullness of the gem. You start to understand it in its greater completeness, right? More fully, you get the facets of it. And so as we do reflection exercises in our lives, we're still looking at the gem. We're just turning it, to see that part of it. And I think that really resonates as an analogy with what you're talking about.
It's a great metaphor, an analogy. I love that.
Yeah. So I think, and then the other thing I think, which was great that you said in terms of intersection with the book and bringing it back to like where people can jump in, you probably find this with your coaching clients too, but you have to start where you are, right? And take the first step that feels like the momentum that you can do. I've heard people say like the exercise that's right for you is the exercise you'll do. Like,
absolutely,
start there and then don't worry about getting it. Just, if you're inclined to move your body, get moving and then let that be the first step. And then maybe you can do the other one. So if you're feeling like maybe you're not ready to do the look above because that just feels too daunting, well, then do some reflecting on your career over the past 10 years or whatever, whatever the thing is that you're looking at, and start there. And then once you investigate that, you're probably going to then have an impetus to like, now I want to consider this. And then as you're ready, you look at the pieces. So it's very flexible, I guess, would be the best word with that. Integrating it as a resource.
And I acknowledge in the book that depending on your wiring, you're going to gravitate to one or more of the perspectives, but there are some perspectives that you might want to avoid or leave to last or push off, as long as possible. So to your point, I mean, everyone is different and in a different place. And so they can kind of start wherever they want to inside the book and hopefully at some point that they will take all those perspectives. They're all helpful. And sometimes
you need the momentum, right? Like you need to start with where you're going to get the momentum, and then the other ones will be energized. Maybe the harder ones will be energized. And so I think about a lot of times there's so much importance to doing a lot of the things that we really do have resistance to do. But if we think about things, there are things in our personalities and in our context are sort of what I would call downstream disciplines. We could just kind of coast on the stream of our personalities and lived experience and context and just like that. This is easy for me. It's good for me, but it's easy for me. And then there are upstream disciplines where we're really swimming against the current. And so those are going to require more effort and energy, and we might need to build some muscles before we're ready to tackle those things. And I think about that even, in how we do trauma work here. We're not going into, we were talking about the past. We're not going into the past until people are ready to go into the past and until they've built some muscles and tools that allow them to do that safely.
Absolutely.
So there's things it's like we have to be mindful of those components as well, where we want people to be equipped to, do the upstream thing that's going to require more difficulty, but to have the muscles and the safety and the things to do that and the support. And I'm sure that you're working with clients that you have as well through, like, I would imagine, you tell me if I'm wrong, maybe tell me a little bit about this. If somebody wanted to work with you to work through this book and some of the principles, you'd be mentoring them through that process, coaching them through that process.
Sure.
Is that
absolutely.
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I love that. Okay. So I wonder if you could tell me just a little bit about, if someone finds themselves in this spot, this midlife opportunity, the things that I have been doing for so long are kind of feeling empty or meaningless, or I feel like I need a change, or I have this incongruence going on, like that sort of, not thriving, not knowing where to go next. That's the person who we think we're kind of writing this book for. You're writing, not me, but you're writing this book for. Let's speak to them, and they're feeling kind of aimless. How do you think the book could help them?
Well, one of the things I talk about in the book, and I do with most of my clients, is I try to create a baseline where they're at. Like, you can't really talk about where you want to go unless you're really clear on where you're at. And you remember the old, if you go to the mall, you used to see the maps out there, and it would say, "You are here."
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, find yourself.
There's a red dot somewhere, and you're trying to figure out where is here.
Yeah.
And for some people, they need to kind of take some time to figure out where is here, where am I at really. So
yeah,
I just use you probably seen you may use them or seen them. Like, I just use a simple life assessment tool, and there's 8 life categories on there, and you can just assess where you're at, like scale it 1 to 10. Like, where are you at in your finances, in your relationships, in your spiritual life, in your career, in your physical health, all those areas.
Yes.
And just in general, as you think about it objectively today, where are you at?
Like taking stock.
Yeah. I do that with Kathy. Like, hey, where are we at? 1 to 10. How's our marriage doing? And if it's an 8 or 9 or 10 being not perfect, but it's really excellent, then that's great. If it's a 4, then I better pull up a chair and say, hey, what's going on?
Yeah.
So anyone can do that. I mean, I do have an example in the book, but I mean, you could just write down those 8 categories or whatever, and just do a personal life assessment, and just be honest. There's no wrong answer. Don't write down 7 if it's really a 3.
That's right.
Just be honest, and there's no judgment. There's no negative about it.
There's no value attached to it as far as like moral value. Just let's just say it how it is.
Scaling questions in general, because there's no right or wrong answer. It's just the answer, and it's just information. And so in the book, you can do that assessment. You can just do it, and you'll see where your strengths are, where you feel like you're succeeding and thriving, and you might see an area or two where that's my health isn't so good. I have some pretty unhealthy habits, and so that's really a 4 out of 10. And in the metaphor of the life wheel, if you have a 4 out of 10, that's going to be a bit of a bumpy ride for that. That wheel's not inflated. In a where everything's kind of 8 to 10 range. Pretty healthy. And that's, as a life coach, that's where we in coaching the client's always generating the agenda, right? So if they identify that a particular area where they need some help or they want to improve, and that's where we go, right? So we start to talk about what would health look like in that category, in that area of your life.
Yes.
And then they envision that. And that's even what the looking ahead perspective is kind of about. I use the whole start with the end in mind, think about the end of your life. I actually write my eulogy, and I included my eulogy in the book. That's hard for some people, but it's a very powerful tool. And
it is.
So I kind of enjoy that. So you reverse engineer that. If I want to be remembered that way, then how do I have to live my life today?
Yeah. So it's crystallizing of that. Yeah.
So the assessment gives my clients a snapshot of where they're at, and it helps them to determine the areas you can't fix everything. Like, you can't tackle 8 areas of your life all at once, but you might pick 1 or 2 and say, hey, you know what, I think I could go there. I need to improve in this. And then you start to create an action plan, put some steps together, and even like you said, like, experiment with some things. And not everybody wants to run a marathon or get up at 4 a.m., to be productive, right? So you have to come up with, I'm a process guy. You better embrace a process that you can enjoy. Otherwise, you're going to be like a typical New Year's resolution person, just give up in middle of January or February because you're not doing stuff you actually like. You're just doing it because you're supposed to. And so personalizing this plan, that's part of it. And again, looking inside, one of my mentors, Dan Miller, he passed away earlier this year, but he said 85% of understanding who you are and having a successful life is looking on the inside, like understanding who you really are, like how you're wired, what's your personality, what are your abilities, what are your gifts, what are you interested in, what I call your unfair advantage, like what are the things that you can do that people go, how do you do that? I don't know, I just do it. But like tapping into some of those things. So that, that's a place to start for the reader.
The aimless person. Yes.
Yeah. And another area where I think is important is that it's probably actually a little deeper level, but that is understanding what your core values are.
Yes.
And I loved your word. I was sitting here before our conversation and I sat here and wrote down the word congruency. And you used that word a few minutes ago. And I wrote that myself. And health is congruent with your core values.
Yeah.
If your life reflects your core values,
there's an alignment.
You're going to experience a measure of health and wellness.
Yeah. Yes.
But I'm not sure everyone takes the time to understand what the true core values are. So that takes some time and effort too. And that's not easy. I'm not saying that's always easy to do, but it's certainly a valuable tool. And so I encourage that as well in the book. Just an example, my family, we grew up, we called it our family values. So we wrote them out with the kids were little. We all signed it. We put on a big plaque and it actually kind of guided our family life. Like love God, family first, work hard, tell the truth, be kind. Those were our family values. And we didn't stick it in the junk drawer.
No, it's orienting.
We looked at it. I bet my kids could still recite it to you, but it wasn't, an exercise. It was like, we want to live this way. We want our family to live this way. So our core values actually determined our choices and the goals we wanted to have and all those kinds of things. So I would say that life assessment and understanding what your core values are pretty critical to determining the trajectory you want to go in.
Yeah.
And to that extent, you're going to be healthy, to put it simply. Like there's a measure of health there.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think there's often, again, these are the kinds of things where to put some scaffolding around exercises and things around determining your values because they feel kind of elusive, right? So I know one of the workshops that I've led many times is, building a manifesto. And you can do that for how you want to parent, for how you want to be in your relationship, for your career in general. Like you can choose how you want, but it's like setting these intentions and they're values-based statements expressed in a way that is motivational for you, that you're going back to as that touch point. Yeah, this is what I want to be about. And if that changes for whatever reason along life's paths, or a season changes and that's not the same focus, it could be a working document, but it's directional, right? It's clarifying it. There's the intention there. And I think that can be a really neat way, in a sense, your family values statements are your own manifesto for what we want to be about as a family.
Right.
This is what we are going to do as a family.
You originally asked me some of the motivation for the book and as a teenager, most people would understand the metaphor, even if they've never been to church. But, I really was that prodigal son, unfortunately. And my life was, I grew up in a loving home and went to church and all that stuff. But then I really just walked away from it all. And I became a really horrible person. And I inflict a lot of pain on a lot of people, especially my family and the people closest to me, but even strangers. Like I just was a horrible human being for all of my teenage years, basically. And, but I knew I was living an incongruent life.
Yeah.
Which partly made me so miserable, but I was never willing to acknowledge it or accept it or anything. And like that, I just kind of dug in my heels a little bit. So that also motivated me to write the book, because I don't want people to spin their wheels. I don't want people to waste their life. And I often say people's purpose is often rooted in their deepest pain. For me, that was a painful time of my life, but mostly self-inflicted.
Sure.
And so I want people to, even if they have those pain points, and we all do, to different degrees, like those are opportunities for us to figure out, life lessons and who we really want to be instead of being that person. So, I think that's exactly what you're just saying. And unfortunately, I lived out the negative side, negatively as that prodigal son who just wasted so much time and effort and energy and harmed people in the process. So I don't want to be that person. I want the opposite. I want to be the person who lives out his values, and ultimately, I think our stories are really for someone else's benefit. It's not even about us at the end of the day. And to me, that's probably the most compelling part, is I'm here to bless somebody else, to make a difference for somebody else. It could be just your spouse or your child, or it could be your coworker. Like, I don't know who it is for the reader or your listener, but we're here for someone else's benefit at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that as an 18-year-old, unfortunately.
I'm not sure a lot of 18-year-olds understand that fully, but I know what you're saying. Like you had an orientation to life that really wasn't serving you and was actually disintegrating you in your, there's a spectrum between sort of our integrated states where we're living life in that congruence and living well and doing the thing that we feel, we're optimally created to do and give back to the world. And there's a state at the other end of that spectrum where we're really as far away as we can get from that. Right. And then there's everything in between. And so when we get into those disintegrated states, that's when you're like, this is not me. Mm-hmm. This is not who I want to be. I don't feel like myself. Right. I'm not at my best, those kinds of things. And so then when you start to decide, no, actually, I want to live in health and in the broad spectrum of what that means, emotionally, physically, mentally, relationally, you're going to a more integrated state where you're like, this is where thriving is. It's not in that disintegrated self-betrayal, self-harm, dismissal of others, mistreatment of others and self, like all of that stuff. It's like, this is not good for me. And I need to move myself into that integration. And so it sounds like your own story, can provide some pathways and some wisdom and some inspiration, even if it's hard won, that like, that's not how you want to be living. So even those 20 somethings, that you are talking to, like, they're not far from that stage when you were feeling like you were really making a mess of things. And so there's a lot of empathy for them and where they are, and ability to offer them hope in a different way.
Yeah, I do. I suppose my book is part memoir, because I do share a number of stories. Some things I just couldn't put in there. I just, or didn't feel it was wise to, but I don't want people just to read about the stories and leave it there. It's really about the reader's story. That's what they're there for. It's to inspire them or get them to think a little differently or challenge them on something, but not just to be entertained by a story, but
to have an impact.
What's your story about? Like, how do you want your story to play out? And you still have chapters to write. So that's really the motivation, even though there are a lot of stories, in the book.
Well, self-disclosure, I think, in those kinds of situations, writing or otherwise, can really bridge that human connection for people. Like, I'm not just speaking theoretically to you. Like, I've lived this story, and I have some examples that can make this more concrete from my life that I can share with you, so that you can then maybe find the examples from your life that would relate to that. And I really think the story is such a powerful way. I mean, from our faith tradition, it's how Jesus taught. He taught in stories because stories were helpful for people, for them to understand, and really important for that meaning making of our experience. So I think that's great. Well, Dan, this is, I mean, again, we said before we could go on a lot longer, but our time is drawing to a close. And so we are, for all of our season 3 people, asking them one final sort of fun question. And this can be anything that you would like it to be, but what is currently in your bedside book stack? So those of us who are writers are often also readers. And so we have a bedside book stack of all the things that were sometimes bigger and smaller, sometimes ridiculously ambitious and totally unrealistic. But I'd love to hear a couple of things that are in your bedside book stack to that are inspiring you right now that you're getting into.
Well, I love the question, and I've always got a bunch of books on the go. For someone who never read a book until college, like I never read ever. So now it's a passion, and obviously I try to read as much as I can. So I love the question. So I just finished reading The Compound Effect again. Like that's by Darren Hardy. I've read it multiple times. It's about how to gain momentum, setting goals and achieving them, and not giving up too early, and realizing the value of the compound effect, like how that plays out as we reach our goals. We're reading this with my small group right now. It's called Doing Life with Your Adult Children.
Oh yes, I've heard of this book.
Have you? Yeah, it's we're all parents of adults in our group, and some of us are grandparents, and so this is a timely book for all of us. So we're just trying to figure out if we're actually doing this right. The tagline is "Keep your mouth shut and the welcome mat out." So
I like it.
That pretty much sums up the book right there, I think.
Yeah, that's good.
Another one is Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. That's
Pete Scazzero.
It's a 40-day devotional tool. And I'll be honest, I'm not really a devotional kind of guy. Like it's not really my go-to thing. But I've started into this, and it's really good.
So good.
I'm really enjoying it. It's just if you need to slow down and take stock and just breathe a little bit, this is a good resource for that, for sure.
Yeah, Pete Scazzero's work, I think he's one of the sort of first people to foray within church context into really discussing emotional health. And there's some great, it sort of started a movement to say, and as a therapist who is very passionate about the intersection of faith and psychology and the therapy work that we do, I think more of those bridge building discussions and integrations of things that, that spiritual health and emotional health are not totally separate things, and to sort of have those. So I think a lot of those conversations, like he really started a bit of a movement there. And we've got some other really great people writing in that space as well to say, actually, we need to do well in the church as far as teaching what it means to, and not segregating our spiritual life from the rest of our life, but really teaching about how our spiritual life can actually inform our emotional and mental health. And so he's great for that. I love that book. Well,
yeah, absolutely.
We're going to put all those books in we put them on our wish list here at the Covey Wellness Bookshop. We've got a great curated number of bookshelves of great titles that people have recommended, that we've recommended and put together, that we really believe are helpful for people in different ways at different stages. Certainly Vantage Point is going to make its way to our shelves. We'll have to figure out just how to do that. But if people do want to connect with you, Dan, and follow along with your work, where's the best way? We'll put this in the show notes as well, but where's the best way for them to connect with you?
My website, I have a website, danbarbercoaching.com. It's under construction right now. It's being revamped. So unfortunately, there's not much there. So it's really terrible timing that way. But I'm working on it with some other people who actually know what they're doing.
That's helpful.
maybe I need your son's expertise. I don't know. So we're getting that underway, but eventually, I mean, that's where it's a blogging site for the most part. So I try to post blogs on a weekly basis, and just around the ideas that you and I have been talking about.
Right.
They can email me if they want to, like. I always have a conversation with a potential client. There's no obligation. If they just want to talk to me for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, I'm happy just to talk and just explore
Like
what's
a free
going on.
consultation kind of thing.
Absolutely. They can call
Yeah.
me. They can email me at dan@danbarbercoaching.com.
Okay.
And we can
Great.
set up a call, and I'd love that. So there's no obligation on, it's not a hard sell. I just,
Yeah.
so those are the ways you can reach
It's
out
so
to me.
important, like for goodness of fit. So, we definitely do some things at the front end too when people inquire to work with people at the center to make sure that people are placed well, and to gather that information and make those connections. And often our clinicians will, even when we've placed somebody with somebody on the team, they'll often make that initial call as well and just navigate that process. So that's great. Well, we'll put all those contacts in the details. Again, if you're somebody in that stage of life and this is resonating, we would encourage you, of course, to pick up Dan's book and to maybe start that journey of turning the gem a little bit and looking in all those places and doing some reflection to figure out where you are and from that, where you want to be headed. And I think there's lots of value in reflection in general, but certainly at different stages in life, you're going to feel a real need for that. And so I would encourage you to use those resources from today's talk and also Dan's book, and certainly reach out to Dan or here at the center if you're looking for somebody to help you in that process. We all do need others to support us in changes that we're making in our life and to help us see blind spots and to walk with us and keep us accountable. We're made to do life with others. And so we're all here for that. And I will just say, Dan, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to talk with us and to serve our listeners. And I do hope that we will meet again. And I'm really excited to get Vantage Point onto our shelves here at the center.
Thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate it. It's been wonderful talking with you. It's been fantastic. Thank you.
All right. Well, you take care. And everybody, you can find us at Covey Wellness Center on all the places, Instagram, Facebook, online at covey-wellnesscenter.com. That's your point of intersection. Lots of free resources there, including our podcast. And then, of course, if the podcast was helpful to you, please share, like, save, subscribe, all the things that helps other people find these resources that we're putting out into the world. We really want to serve people well, and these conversations can be super helpful. So we appreciate all of that. And until next time, take good care.